My name is Richard Young. Thank you so much for coming off to this fantastic talk. I am excited to see both Marsha and Anthony and hear them talk, as well as having you out here as well. So our talk goes around from around 5:30 to about, I believe it's 7 o'clock. We're going to have intros, and we're going to have a 50-minute talk, and then we're going to have some Q&As. In regards to the Q&As, you can just throw your questions into the Q&A section. So if you go down to your webinar at the bottom, there's a Q&A section, Q&A, not Q&R, and then just type in your questions there. And what's going to happen is our Emily Sasso, who's our administrator and WGC staff, she will then collect those, and then when it comes to Q&A, we'll then send them over to me, so then I'll be asking them as well. So any questions at all, any sort of like any of those sorts of questions, you can ask them into the Q&A. And if you have to do, I think, a chat, you can do a private chat to the person who's WGC, that's Emily as well. And then you can send it, if you have any sort of details like tech issues, etc., you can talk to her as well. So first of all, let's start off with an acknowledgement. So the Writers Guild of Canada would like to acknowledge that although this event is online, we each live and work on ancestral Indigenous land. As we gather tonight, we would also like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit, on which the City of Toronto and our office stands. We give our thanks and respect for the leadership of Indigenous land defenders across the country, for always being at the forefront of protecting the earth and all life that sustains it. And we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. All right, in terms of our first guest here, well, let's first introduce Marsha Green. What do we ought to say about Marsha Green here? So Marsha Green, she's a writer and a showrunner. She has a bunch of credits that include that include Coroner, the limited series drama 10 Days in the Valley from ABC, and the first season of Global's detective drama Private Eyes. So she's best known for her work on the critically acclaimed drama Mary Kills People, for which she earned 4 CSA nominations, and the groundbreaking historical series The Porter, which is on CBC and BET. She's been a member of the Writers Guild of Canada since 2014 and is also the vice president of your WGC Council. There we go. Please give your hands up. I can't hear it, but please give a hand up to Marsha Green. And let's show off the trailer for The Porter, if you could, Emily.
First thing, shoes are important. No scuffs, perfect polish. And when you walk, walk like a man with answers, because whether or not you have them, that's who you have to be.
If anyone's got a right to that stage, it's me.
You think I'm out front just because I'm creaming your coffee? Try a little talent.
Zeke, you make sure that my husband stays out of trouble tonight.
Don't I always?
You think I need a partner?
I think you need a man that knows every vein in them trains.
What makes you think you'll even make it to the door?
I have been called the most dangerous Negro in America.
If I wanted to get the Porters into a union, what's the first thing I should do?
The great fear of the white worker is that our elevation means their elimination.
We are supposed to create our own opportunities.
There are rules to be obeyed, Marlene, and I strongly suggest you start playing yours.
When I hear somebody trying to sell me on a better life, I gotta ask myself, what is so bad about the life they got?
I know y'all might be scared of what might happen if we do this, but maybe it's time we start thinking about what happens if we don't.
You sure you don't want to work with me?
You sure you don't want to join the movement?
I'm good.
The force of our oppression is the truest measure of our power.
Known when to be a bull-headed Negro motherfucker, and when not to be.
I'm a poor Tepapsi, the most invisible man on the earth.
Such great, awesome show. Like, and also like, oh man, so many amazing actors. I'm just watching them be like, oh, well, all these people are great. Ronnie, Kevin, like they're all Ramuna. Like, this is so great to like watch all those fantastic faces and speaking your words. This is amazing. So that is Marsha. Our next guest, equally as awesome, is Anthony Q Pharrell. Pharrell, I said it right. I know you for like decades. Did I say it properly? Pharrell? Farrell. I keep saying Pharrell.
For real, keeping it for real.
He was recently named both Playback and Writers Guild of Canada Showrunner of the Year. That's 2 awards from 2 separate organizations. He's written and produced in television Canada, the US, the UK. His credits include The Office, Overlord and the Underwoods, The Secret Life of Boys, Parker Andersons, and Amelia Parker. So we got 2 trailers to show here. I mean, because Porter's a 1-hour show and we got 2 half hours. So we got to show 2 trailers on Anthony's side, just make sure it's equal there. So let's first show the trailer for Overlord and the Underwoods. Please, if you could, Emily.
Aliens are real.
I can't keep a straight face.
He's my mom's 7th cousin once removed.
I'm incredibly interesting.
Cool, right?
You're an alien, aren't you?
Family meeting right now. Human family.
Your mother wants nothing to do with me. My own flesh and blood. You think you know your 7th cousin once removed?
We promised he could stay with us to keep him safe. Kalasa still has goons scouring the galaxy for him.
Overlord!
No, Overlord's here.
She's a bounty hunter.
God, we got your back. If you want Overlord, you're gonna have to go through me.
I'm the one you want. Take me.
That cosmic vacuum was a bounty hunter?
You're welcome.
There we go. And as Emily's going to come back and show Parker Anderson's trailer, a little bit of trivia. That robot, ROFL, is voiced by Canada's own Jan Arden. If you weren't able to hear that voice there. So we got some big celebrity action going on there. Emily, if you throw on in the Parker Anderson's trailer.
Will someone tell me what happened today?
Great question.
Oh, you guys do fist pumps now?
Yeah.
May the best Parker Anderson win.
Am I crazy or is this a bit ridiculous?
Why is this happening?
What a twist!
Oh, it's the business.
Oh, you can't wear that.
No, you can't wear that.
Just keep smiling supportively.
That's a code violation. Arr, matey!
What do you think?
It's me, Amelia. I haven't talked much since the accident.
This is fun, huh?
What's the polite way to say, I'm black, so it's different, without words?
I know it can't be easy doing stuff like this and wishing your mom was here.
No.
I'm eating!
No.
It's nice, you two hanging out.
Well, how long have you been there?
The whole time.
Ah, besties. Dr. Brown comes highly recommended.
She has experience with speech therapy and with people who suffered trauma.
Sure you want to keep doing this?
I wouldn't change it for the world.
I went to with Daddy, and I'm just gonna try something. Be right back.
So let's jump in on this talk. So we're talking about the art of showrunning here. So we got these 2 great showrunners here. And as I discussed with Anthony and Marsha, I wanted to make this more of a learning session. I think there's probably going to be 3 groups of writers here. We got writers here who are writers who may be moving more to the producer level. We have writers at the producer level, maybe actually, close to getting the showrunner gig, et cetera, or you may have current or new showrunners looking to borrow/steal the methods of the greats we have here from Marsha and Anthony. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, is really talking about the art of showrunning, what it's all about, and kind of, getting some sort of details to help you accelerate in those sorts of positions here. So I guess the first question I want to start off with both Anthony and Marsha, I'm going to throw it off, is my first question is, how do you define showrunner and what are their responsibilities? I'm going to throw that over to you, Marsha. How do you define showrunner and what would be a showrunner's responsibilities in your personal opinion?
In my opinion, the showrunner is literally, as the name suggests, the person who runs the show. And I feel like what that means is that you are the keeper of the vision of the show, and all of the other responsibilities and departments and people who are working on the show kind of come from that. It's up to you to lead them, to help them be excellent at their jobs as well, by really understanding your show, knowing what it is, knowing what works and what doesn't, and making those tough calls when need be. The responsibilities, I mean, everything. It's like I actually had brunch today with a friend of mine who's a writer and director, and who had recently been a showrunner. And he was like, "Oh, it's like, this is a really hard job." And I'm like, "It sure is." I think like when you're a writer or when you're a director, or when you have other, you get to do you're doing maybe getting to focus more on like one piece of the puzzle. And when you're the showrunner, it really is your job to have your eye on each piece. Like, you are the keeper of the whole. And so you don't necessarily have to like laser in on one thing, or you do at certain periods, but you always have to keep in your mind all of the other pieces. So you're in charge of the show during development and getting it off the ground, and like making sure that the scripts in the room are being being run and executed in the way you want. And then pre-production, when all the other departments come in and you're deciding locations and production design and costumes and all of that, through production. Most showrunners, I think, in this day and age are usually there every day or almost every day, unless they're lucky enough to have a writer's room where the writers can kind of sub in and be on set sometimes. But often at this point, it's just the showrunner who's still there. So you're on set every day, and then you're in post, putting it all together, the final pieces together until the end. So it's everything is your responsibility, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Anthony, do you have anything else to add on those in terms of ideal showrunner, what the responsibilities are?
I would say agreed.
There we go.
I think the thing that I always liken it to is like, business wise, is you're the CEO of the creative, is the kind of the way I think of it, right? Every creative decision has to come through you. It doesn't mean you have to like tell the costume designer what type of buttons someone needs in a shirt, but like, you should be aware at least of everything that's happening creatively on the series, so you can give your opinion and make sure that it meets the vision that you're looking for. And and in terms of responsibility is exactly what Marsha said. You have to be on top of everything from the beginning, when you are, sometimes if you're a showrunner who's there for the development, then great, from the very beginning of development all the way through to delivery of the show. And so the idea of like the responsibilities, we're going to get into all of that as we go, but it's many, they are varied. You have to have a Swiss Army knife filled with lots of intricate tools to be able to do this job.
Yeah. You know what, speaking of which, because, you talk about, both of you've talked about showrunner being like the creative vision or the ownership, but I really want to clarify for a lot of folks about how much of a management thing is. So I feel like, when you're talking about showrunner, there's writing, there's creative input that you're doing, and there's also managing people. So I just want to think of percentage wise, like when you were a writer, how much of your percentage was writer, creative input, managing people versus producer versus showrunner? Just to kind of give an example of like, yeah, this is how much writing you actually do when you're a showrunner. So like when you're like honestly just being hired as a story editor or writer, I'm assuming it's all just write. Basically all you're doing is writing. You're writing some creative input. In a producer, and like as a showrunner, if you had to divide out in like a show, what percentage were you writing, what percentage were creative input, and what percentage were you like managing, having to manage people or timelines, et cetera, et cetera? Do you have any like rough estimates of what you think that would be?
Rough estimates? I feel like, I'll just say like when you're, and I've gone and I've still done like freelance for other people's shows, even after I was showrunning, and you come in, it's such a nice breezy gig. Come in, hey, here's the thing. What do you think about that? Write this, outline, cool, write it, give it, you do a couple of drafts. You might see it on TV eventually. Just let it go. So that the amount of time to do that it's comparatively, it's so little, because it's like that, you do that for like 1 or 2 episodes in someone else's show. Cool. It takes a little bit of time. But then if you're show running, you have to be on the other side of that for every single episode of the series. So everything that gets written, you have to read, give notes on, usually at the same time as producers or before producers see it. And then once network sees it, then you have to not only address those notes, but also sometimes you have to push back on those notes. And that leads to more conversations. And that happens for every single script, right? So the time comparisons, it's not even close when it comes to like when you're writing on a series versus when you're show running and producing on something, just because there are so many other elements, especially when you get into production and you get into post, it's a lot.
Yeah. Marsha, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I think, it's true. I was saying today that it is like this kind of wonderful, it's not that being a showrunner isn't great, but when you go to work on someone else's show and everything isn't your responsibility / problem, it's like, it's a dream. You're in there, you're like writing, you're coming up with ideas. And then it's like, your showrunner wants something, it's like, no problem. Like, let me help you out. Let me do this other thing. And like, I think to me, one thing that is like a real joy about going back now, so like being a showrunner who then goes to write on someone else's show, is that you are so much less precious about anything because you know the other side of it. So like when you're starting out and it's like you have an idea and then it's like your idea's gone, you're like upset, you're trying to fight for your idea, it's the best idea you've ever, it's like, it's fine. You don't like that idea? Let me give you another one. Let's just do something else, because you just got to like keep it moving. And you understand that so well as a showrunner, because it's like, yeah, you're doing this for, as Anthony said, for every script, you have a hand in every part of it. Not as much as the writer, of course, because the writer starts with the blank page and we always have to honor that, but you do so much rewriting. And I would say in terms of managing people, I think when you're starting out, you're more managing like the dynamics of the room, trying to figure out that hierarchy, how your showrunner likes to work, or, those are the kind of managing parts that you're doing when you're starting out. And then when you're a showrunner, obviously you manage the room and you're navigating those relationships as well, but you're adding the producers and networks on. And when you're a writer starting out, you very rarely have to deal with producers and networks. So you get to be in a bit of a bubble of what the notes process from that end is, and the pushback, as Anthony is saying, like all of those conversations that you need to be in. And, if you're fortunate, which often you are, you'll write a few episodes, but you do, 100 times more rewriting as a showrunner, 100%, that's the percentage, 100% more rewriting showrunner than you did as a writer. Like you rewrite your own stuff as a writer, you're very rarely called on to rewrite others. And as a showrunner, that is part of the job. And, again, for your vision and for your voice, make sure that everything feels like one beautiful piece at the end.
Cool. All right. Well, let's talk about, as opposed to getting like right into like, how do you showrunner, or how do you showrunner? How do you manage? I want to talk about like your roots. Like I'm sure, you didn't start off as showrunners. You didn't come out of, your program being cool, I'm showrunning a show. You're working under a whole, you have a bunch of credits and stuff, both of you here. And I'm hoping that, from there, as you were coming up, did you see like good experiences or bad experience being like, oh, that's a great leadership thing I need to take, I want to emulate? And other people like, that's a great example of things I will never do when I get up to that position. And so when you were coming up there, were you able to see a couple of lessons that at the time you thought were great, or maybe even when you saw at the time, you're like, why are they doing this? This doesn't make any sense. But now the showrunner, you're like, oh, now I get why they were doing that. Now I see why that's important. So yeah, do you have any sort of role models or anti-role models as you're coming up?
Can we start with Marsha?
No, I'm going to start with Anthony because we started with Marsha last time.
All right. I'm sorry. I was just getting a call from my...
Oh, cool. Then I'll go to Marsha. Sorry. I don't want to interrupt your career, Anthony.
No. I think whoever's at the house is hopefully all right. So it might be just the dog set off the alarm. So that's usually what happens. But they'll call back. I think what was the question? Just the first part of it?
Should I go off to Marsha? And then
No. What was the
my question was who are the
experience?
Your role models or anti-role models as you were coming up?
So for me, it was different because I came up in the States, right? So my first jobs were in America. And so my first big writing job was The Office. And then I wrote a bunch of other American series. So the style down there is different than the style here in Canada. So for me, I was kind of trained to be a showrunner because as writers in the States, you're on set, like you're doing pre-production, production, and post-production at the same time, right? So that's great showrunner training because I'm on set with the director, giving notes to actors for my script. I'm also close to the stage so that when other people are doing their episodes, I can be down there and learning things. And then in post, because post is done at the same time, like I can be with the editors and learning those things. So I saw it kind of firsthand. And one of the things that Greg Daniels did with all of his writers was he's kind of training writers to become showrunners when they had their shot. And that's one of the things I try to do now. Like I always tell my writers, like, listen, I want you all to be showrunners someday. So I'm going to be looping you into all these decisions. I'm going to let you know why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. And hopefully when you get to a place where you're in this position, you have, you're at least starting from a base knowledge where you understand like these are the decisions that you're going to have to deal with. In terms of great things that I saw, certain things I saw, like with Greg Daniels, I'll call him out again. Like he was very appreciative. He was very much the person that would say thank you, made sure he knew everyone's names. It fostered a strong environment on set with the showrunner, and everything trickles down, right? So if the showrunner is humble and generous and says thank you, everyone else on set will be humble and generous and say thank you. And that's kind of one of the big lessons I took from that experience, and I take it with me anytime I go on a set now. So and I have been very lucky. I haven't worked with most of the showrunners I've worked with have been excellent and I've learned a lot from them. And I have not had, and if I have had dickish showrunners, I may have just forgotten or just pushed those memories aside maybe. So yeah, that is my answer to the question I initially forgot.
There we go. Cool. Marsha, how about yourself? Any sort of role models or any best practice you saw as you're coming up?
I think the most important thing that I learned, which I didn't realize at the time was rare, was the best idea wins. So when I was coming up, I worked for showrunners who really believed that. And so I was incredibly outspoken. I would challenge ideas, even if they were the showrunner's ideas, because I really believed that, it was best idea wins. And as I was in other rooms, I realized that, people sometimes don't have that experience and they get backlash for challenging the showrunner. So that the showrunner just wants you, so that then when the showrunner wants something, they just agree with it. And then the showrunner leaves the room and then they're like, oh, it's a terrible idea. And I'm like, well, why aren't you saying that when the person is there? And then they're like, but that's a thing that people don't do. And I didn't realize that because I really had been, kind of raised in this environment that it was the best idea wins. And there wasn't really, people didn't have an ego about it in that way. And I was recently working with a writer and we were doing a story point and I was asking her to tell me, pitch the scene to me, what is whatever. And she was like, I don't know. And she was like, can you just tell me what you want it to be? And I was like, well, I don't want you to just go and do what I want. I want you to understand the scene and be able to write it from your own perspective, not whatever. And then later we talked and she said, she was like, I'm sorry, I just have worked for people where they just want you to do what they want. They don't want you to have, but I'm like, but I know as a writer how challenging that can be to go home and be faced with a beat that you don't understand, that you don't know what its function is or what the scene is, you know? So for us to work it out together is the dream. So I think that for me, that is like a very important, I think it's a nice way to be. Let's just say that. Like, I think it's a nice way to be in the room. And I think it's nice to be the kind of leader who doesn't have such an ego that they cannot accept other people's wonderful ideas, because I think that's why we're in it. And it should really feel like we're all making it together, and not just that these are people you hired to like write down what you would do. You know, you should have hired them to like help you grow and help you do more and come up with things you would never come up with on your own. Like, that to me is what the room should be.
Yeah.
So one thing I will say, one thing that I learned very early that I thought was, I don't do it, but I really appreciated it when I was in the room, was that the showrunner used to, at the beginning of each day, would say like, oh, what were you thinking about last night? Or did anything come to you in the shower or whatever? And would just go around the room at the top of the day and go to each person and they would answer. And I guess for some people, maybe like, obviously there was some pressure to then have something to say in this roundtable. But what's good is that sometimes, and especially for me, it was like you're really shy in the very beginning. Like, so it just gave you a chance to really think about an idea and not have to be in the room like pitching when it's all crazy. And sometimes you can't think that fast, or you're just more a person who needs to like sit down and really, so it just gave everybody an opportunity to like contribute something at some point. And I thought that was like really helpful for me, because just doing it helped me. I mean, it was also a way to keep us working all the time, because then it was like, oh, I got to go home and think of something to come up with tomorrow. But still, it was a nice opportunity to get to speak, I think, for people who were less aggressive in the room.
You know, what's interesting how you talk about this is that this is this sort of like social dynamic, or you work in the room, like these things that you might think as a junior writer, being like, why are we doing this? But in your understanding as a showrunner, it actually helps create that dynamic, not just for that writer, but other people. If they're hearing someone else speak at the beginning, they're not automatically discounting them, being like, oh, they didn't speak up. It's like, or that can be a story, or understanding what that is. But you know what? I want to pull on this thread that you brought up about Marsha, which is talking about having the best story wins, and about how sometimes showrunners, you know, you talk about them having a big ego. Now, I'm going to project a whole bunch of my own therapy work here. I assume that this is probably more of an inferiority complex of like, maybe if I'm like a new showrunner, I'm super afraid of, I'm going to screw this up. So I got to like hold on as much as I can. And like, I can't look bad. I can't look terrible. I can't, what if all of a sudden people realize I'm not very good at my job? So what would be your advice to like newer showrunners, or like, you know, if I were to get in that showrunner, to make sure I need to like kind of make sure I'm a leader while I was not freaking out and being like, how much do I know how much of my leadership is leadership? Or is it like, I need to protect my ego? So how have you been through that? Or have you or you or Anthony, have you ever had to navigate that sort of thing to be like, that's leadership, that's me, that's my ego, that's that sort of thing? Has it ever happened to either of you?
I mean, I think that your job is to protect the show. And so sometimes someone's pitching something and it's like, it just doesn't feel right to you, and it's your show and you know it better than anybody. And in most cases, or when you take on a show, it becomes a part of you and you have to follow that instinct. You have to protect, like, if things, even if everybody in the room is like, that's amazing, but doesn't feel right to you because it doesn't feel like your show, then you have to say that. And maybe some people might think that that's ego, and maybe it is, but I like to really think of it as like, I don't know, I really just go by feelings. Like, I feel like, oh, does it feel right? Do I get excited? Do I think, oh, I would want to write that scene? Like, then it's like, it's good. I really do feel when I'm making something, it does feel, it's like weird. It's both. It's like, I picture it like in front of me. Like, I picture watching it like kind of on TV. And then that's how I know like how I would react to it, even if it's something that like I'm coming up with. Like, Anthony, I don't know if you ever have this, but like when I'm on set and I'm like watching the actors, I don't even think about the fact that I wrote it. I feel like I'm just watching the show and reacting to whether or not I think it's good. not whether or not like, ooh, that thing I wrote. Look at them say it. I don't think like that, certainly.
I've often been told, like, I was like, I don't remember whose pitch that was. And they're like, it was your pitch. It's like, I don't remember pitching that, but I'm glad it makes me like, it's making me laugh now. So whatever, it worked. But I think the ego thing is true, but it's okay. Like, it's okay to have an ego. You've earned this role. You've earned this spot. You've worked to the place where you become a showrunner. It's okay to be, have an ego about things. Yeah, you've created this thing or you're showing this thing. For whatever reason, you're in a position of power because you have worked your ass off to get to that place. So own that, right? Like, I think if someone pitches an idea to you that you feel like, oh, doesn't feel like the show, don't be a jerk about it. Be gracious and be like, oh, you know what? That's a good pitch. I'm worried about these things. It takes it away from this character, whatever it is, explain it. And as long as, and I think a lot of up and coming showrunners that I talk to, they're always worried about hurting writers' feelings. And I think it's one of those things where if you are just honest and you treat every idea the same, like equally, like it's not just like, some writers might go home and feel like they're pitching things that get shut down every single time. And if that's the case, you can talk to them separately on the side and say, hey, listen, keep pitching. It's all right. I've been in your shoes where you feel like nothing's working. You're going to break through because you're a good writer and you're here for a reason, right? But I do think it's important for you to kind of like hopefully set that stuff aside where you're worried about other people's feelings and just like Marsha said earlier, the best pitch wins. And if you are doing that on a regular basis, I think Rich, you've been in one of my rooms. Like, it's pretty, like when we talk through things, it feels like, oh, we're just kind of picking the idea that makes everyone kind of go, yes, that feels right. And then everyone feels like, and everyone kind of like, has their moments where they have the thing in the script, and everyone has those moments where they pitch something that doesn't go in, but hopefully you get to a place where everyone's got something they can be proud of in the show, right? Well,
I think Anthony, these are all great points you're bringing up, but the second half of this equation, whereas like I always feel that that you're very upfront and honest, but I felt that when I was in your rooms is that you gave us all the information, like you showed us what the sandbox was, like what is the sandbox, what are the characters, what are the tones, and then if we pitched something that was outside of that, you were very much being like, I think this is funny, this is great here, but you were also very articulate and being able to explain why. And like when you rejected me, like there was a couple episodes in something that I wrote, I was like, I wanted to go this way. And you were like, you took me, you're like, here, this is great. It's really funny. I think it's great, but here's why it wouldn't work. And because you explained it to me, I'm like, I get that. So I think that you've talked about how you talk about it's not just like you have an ego because you've been here, you deserve to be here, you've got here. But I think you're also, the other aspect of that is your responsibility which you did really well, is you really were able to articulate what the sandbox is. So people could either make suggestions, give their own heart that fits in the sandbox, or if they were off center, they were able to understand why they were off center, as opposed to feeling like, oh, Anthony just hates me. That's why this idea is no.
I think that there's one thing that I always try and do, which I assume I picked up from someone else. But it's like if someone pitches something, like I always try and find like the piece of it that might work. Like usually, sometimes there's a piece of it that might work, or the intention of it is right, but that like, it's like, oh, what it isn't right, but what you're poking at there, like the idea of these two people is good, but maybe we can find another way to get there that fits more with their character or whatever. Like, I think that's good, to your point, to help people understand why it's bumping for you, or why it's not sitting right, or why it doesn't feel grounded in the show. I was thinking in terms of ego, I was thinking about this particular showrunner that I worked for. And I remember we were doing a script. It was kind of like group writing, and someone pitched this joke and everybody was like dying laughing. We're like, it just was so funny. And every time we heard it, we would just laugh. And so whatever. So then it like went to the floor, because we were writing like very close to when we were shooting. So not that much time actually even passed between when we were like, maybe we were just doing a punch-up pass on the script and then it was going right before. Anyways, so the dailies come out and we like get the dailies at lunch and we put it in. We're so excited to see. And then he changed it. The showrunner changed it on the floor. And I feel like he changed it because he didn't like that it was this hilarious joke that he didn't come up with. Not even like an alt, like, you know, you do the one we've all agreed upon, and then you get a few extras. Sure, always good to have options, always good to have alts, but just straight up put another joke in. And like once kept us for an hour because someone pitched this joke that we all thought was great and was like, I don't know, and just tried to come up with anything else. And then an hour later was like, I guess that's the best joke. And I'm like, it's okay for other people to have good ideas. That's why they're here. You know, it's that, like, that to me felt like it was 100% ego and not about like, this isn't a joke that's making everybody laugh. And at the end of the day, I don't even know whose name was on that script, you know, especially when you group write. Everybody's in it together. We don't know at the end of the day who wrote this thing really, you know? So anyways, don't do that if you're becoming a showrunner. It's not cool.
All right. Well, talking about becoming showrunners, let's jump to like, you know, both of you worked your way, you know, you go through a career as a writer, moving up to co-producer, you're getting all those other experiences. And now let's get to like, you know, when you get into that showrunner role. So I want to ask you here, like, you know, how did you move? How did you move into the showrunner role? Did you think you were ready? When you did the showrunner, what were the surprises? How did you screw up? And what were those things that first stumble through of being the showrunner? So really, like, how did you get there? Did you think you were ready, or did you have to fight for it? You know what? Let's start about that. How did you get into the showrunner role? Did you think you're ready, or did you have to fight for it? I'll start with Anthony here.
For me, the first showrunner thing was more of like during the writer's strike in 2009, something like that, I wrote like a pilot. And after the strike, I wanted to just kind of like have my own series and do my own thing. And I wasn't going to wait around for a broadcaster. So I put together like a web series and just kind of like started showing that and brought in writers and I wrote the pilot and had people kind of come in and pitch ideas. And we kind of we had a little writer's room, and then obviously we shot stuff. And so that was kind of like my first unofficial showrunning gig. And I think obviously I made a lot of mistakes, and I feel like, you know, if I could go back and do different things a little differently, I would. But the core of that experience was that got to work with a lot of friends, got to make something fun. I felt really good about like the stuff we put together, and it felt good to be in charge of the content, right? The next like real time I was kind of showrunning was for Secret Life of Boys for BBC, and that's in the UK. That's a different situation where it's like for the first season I wrote all the scripts. So, and in the UK, especially 2014, 15, they had a different situation where it was like, you're the lead writer, we don't need you on set. And I was like, nah, dog, I'm coming. And then I went out to Belfast and I was like there on set. And then I actually I was working on the Thundermans at the time. I actually could only stay for like the last week of prep and the first week of production. And by the end of that first week of production, they were like, you can't leave. And I was like, I gotta go. You didn't want me in the first place. Now you understand what it's like to have someone who actually wrote the words on set. And so that was a very interesting situation, only because it was like, you know, the UK, at that time especially, they didn't do showrunners per se the way that they do in the States, and definitely not the way they do it here in Canada. So I learned a lot about how much work it takes, how much communication you have to have with, you know, at that time point, I didn't really have I didn't have any of the writers until the second season of Secret Life of Boys, but I had to learn about production. I had to learn more about working with other producers, with directors, with art, having an opinion about what color a wall should be, and like all the little things that go into the look of your series. Just being able to like the volume of questions that come at you. I think that's kind of like what I took from those first couple of experiences. And I think the things that I did wrong, I think in terms of like just, I think for me, the things I did wrong was not trusting myself sometimes and just kind of like letting people kind of take control of things that I was like, well, if this is the thing that you're supposed to do, then go and do that thing. And then at the end of it being like, I should have been on top of that. Like, because I just trusted that imposter syndrome, right? Where you're like, oh, well, this is my first time really doing it. They know better. And then realizing, no, they didn't know better. I should have stepped in and said something or been there or something. So, but that, yeah. that's kind of what I learned.
All right, Marsha, how about you? Your first showrunner experiences. Did you have to fight for it? Did you feel you were ready? Did you stumble? Did you knock it out of the park and knew everything perfectly?
The first time I was ever a showrunner was a show in development, and somebody else there was a writer who had written it, and then there was a different writer who had taken it over to be the showrunner in development. And then she had to go. She was moving to the US actually. And she called me and she said, "Oh, I think you should take this show over. I'm going to suggest to the production company that you take this show over as a showrunner." And I was like, what? I didn't think that I was ready. It seemed but then I read it and I just couldn't get it out of my head. And then I met with the production company. We had a meeting. We had 2 meetings. And in the second meeting, I remember I had this idea about the show. And so I was explaining to the producer, what the idea was. And it was kind of just about a scene, really. But what it showed them and also what it showed me was kind of the reason why I should take over the show. That it was, I have a take on it. Because it's you need to have a take. You need to have what are you trying to say in the story? What are you trying to show? So that was how, even though I had started off feeling that I was not ready, by the time I had that meeting, when I was pitching and seeing their reaction, I understood why my friend had said you should do it and why I should. And then we had a development room. And I remember this was very early in the process. We were all in the room pitching some ideas for a story. And then, we had differing ideas. And then at one point, and we were all kind of saying our pitches and whatever. And then it just went silent and nobody was saying anything. And I realized that it was because everybody was looking at me to make a decision. It was I'd forgotten, it was oh yeah, that's my job now. I'm going to be the one who says, oh, this is the one we're going to do. Oh, I just saw, has anyone else lost audio in the chat?
I'm still hearing it.
Okay, great. And so, but that show never got made. So I really only had the experience of development and having that development room. And I just want to, actually, while we're on the subject, can I just quickly say something that I've heard has come up a lot? So when I was in that room, the producer came into the room on the first day, which, to say hi and whatever, and then stayed. And then the next day came back again. And I was this is a problem. At this point, it was I had been in many a room. So I knew that it wasn't normal. And it obviously changed the dynamic so much. And so I was man, what am I going to do? Anyways, and so I just had to have the uncomfortable conversation with this person and with this producer and ask them to not come. And in case you're wondering, if anybody out there is wondering how I did that, I just said, and this is the truth. This isn't the lie I made up. This was the truth. I said that I really felt I needed to build a connection with the room, that I needed to build this team of people, and to see me as the showrunner, to build this show together. And that having the producer there, who is in fact all of our bosses, or that's how we feel. It's obviously now it's they're looking to you to see if the idea is good or if it's working. And that's not allowing me to kind of fill this role. And so I was I just need some time on my own with the writers for us to find our groove and our own rhythm. And this producer said, I totally understand. And I was we can talk about it again in a week or 2 or whatever. And then it just never came up again. So that's how I said it. And I just wanted to say that at this moment, because I know it's been happening a lot. I've heard that it's been happening a lot. And I know it's really uncomfortable. But just sometimes that's the thing with being a showrunner. You have to have uncomfortable conversations, unfortunately. And that's that's part of the job. So that was anyway. So, but in that room, I forgot to make the decision. So that was like the first time I screwed up. And then after that, shortly after that, I ran Mary Kills People. And I would say, similar to what Anthony said, what I would consider to be my biggest screw up were the things that I didn't speak up about, things that I was like, it's not right. And I didn't say anything because so many people knew more than me in my mind. These were producers who had been, and whatever, that I felt like the least experienced person. And then I was in post kicking myself like, I knew that wasn't going to work. I should have said something. All the times I didn't. And, it's just, but I find it much easier to let go of things when I've done my best, when I feel like I did my best and it didn't work out and that's what it is, as opposed to, I wish I had said something like that. Actually, I feel like I hang on to more and hurts more in the end.
Yeah. I always tell people like, if you're in a scene and you're shooting something and you feel like, you don't have it, don't move on, because you can't come back to this. You can't come back to this moment. If it's going to take you another 5 minutes to get it the way you want to get it, take that 5 minutes. You're going to go OT for a few minutes. It's much better than spending a bunch of money in VFX to try and undo something or try to bring a bunch of people in to reshoot something or ADR, like whatever it is. Like, I think I always tell people, like, if you can get, like, if you don't have it, just take another one, get another shot.
And it's hard because you'll feel a lot of pressure on set, a lot of pressure from people, like the time we need to move on. Like, there are all these reasons, all these reasons why we need to move on. But it's like, you need to, this is what is the benefit, I guess, that we don't have in this country very much anymore. But when you do get to be in post, when you're more aware of, like, you can kind of start to see like the scene coming together and knowing what you might need and what you don't. And that just kind of comes with experience. So it's a bit easier as you go on to be able to recognize that. But as Anthony said, like, trust your instincts, trust your gut, and like ask for what you want, and like maybe make people not happy with you.
It's interesting you bring this up, talking about how you want to make sure you have the time to do the stuff that you're doing. So that I feel that also requires that for you as showrunners, you need to also be very organized or planning. Like, look, disasters are going to happen, of course, during COVID, during sets. This is all casts, crazy casts, whatever. So it does sound, though, is that, like, in order for you to make sure you have that time or that buffer to really get the shots you need if shit happens. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm spare, whatever. That you need to be doing the organizing like way before. Like, is that like a big part of your job of like Gantt charts and planning and trying to make sure you have those skills? Are you doing them by yourselves? Are you doing them with other people? Like, how much of that is really important to your job? I'll throw it off to Marsha here.
I mean, in terms of being on set, I would say what's really important is to tone the scripts with the director. Like, because it's like, because you do have to plan, because you can't be waiting until the last minute to be like, oh, and now I want to do this. Like, you should be trying, as you said, to do as much in advance as you can. Like when you're in prep. And so that means talking to the director, talking to all of the departments. That's why, so that when you get to the floor, it's like the outfit that the person is wearing is an outfit you've approved. Not like it's coming to the floor and then you're like, oh, what is this person wearing? This is terrible. Now you got to go back to wardrobe and all of these things. So this is why you want to be in prep and be as hands-on as possible, because it is a bit of an inconvenience for everybody for you to then on the floor be making the decision of, I want something else. What if the truck's not there? The wardrobe truck's not there. Now you got to send the actor back. The whole thing's getting pushed for a decision that probably you could have made before. So I would say being in prep and toning with the director, it's so that the director knows what you want from the scene, what is important in the scene for you, and then they can do their job to get that from the scene. And then it's really, really helpful for you to be in the blocking. So when they're just setting up the scene and getting the positions, and again, now this is an opportunity before the cameras are rolling to give your notes, to say, could you make sure they do it a little bit like this, or could we, so all of those are the areas where you I would say try and find the moments to like make decisions to make the day go faster. And then obviously all kinds of things are going to happen in the moment, and then you make a decision in the moment and delay if you have to or whatever. Anthony, what do you got?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's like you have to, you just have to be on top of so many different things, right? I'm trying to think if there's any specific moments that I can point to that would be helpful. No, I'm drawing a blank. I don't have any helpful moments. No, I feel like Marsha answered exactly the way I was going to answer it. So it feels like I don't know what else to add.
Okay. All right. Well, here's the thing. It's 6:21. I know we got to throw it to the Q&A. So I have three questions. They're big ones though. But the three questions I feel might cover off some of these questions here. The first question is running a writer's room. That's a kind of a big open question in terms of how do you manage a writer's room? And in terms of what I'm saying writer's room, we're talking about, cultivating a story, managing conflict, whether you have to give constructive criticism if a writer is not bringing it. How do you staff those things? What are some of the things that you've seen that when you're running those rooms, like what is your approach, or what is the Marsha Green approach, or what is the the AQF approach to running a room that you feel is really important? This would be like just to tell other people who be showrunners or also potential writers for a room, being like, oh, cool, I need to remember how to do this. So I'll throw this off to Marsha.
No, I think Anthony, I just gave a long answer. So
okay,
Anthony,
cool. Let's go to AQF. Here we go. How do you run a room?
First thing, I want to make sure that I hire writers who are, everyone's got to have great scripts, first of all. If you don't have a great script, then you're not ready to be in an AQF room, because I want you to make sure that, just truthfully, I feel like if you're still learning that crap, that's great. I think I'm happy to help you get better, but when it's go time, I want someone who's going to bring a script to me that feels like it's in a really great place, so that there's less work for me down the line. So to get into the room, that's the first thing. You have to have a great script. And then beyond that, if you're connected to the material in a different way than I am, so that I can lean on you for certain parts of the material that I don't have access to, I think that's a great thing. So building the room around those things, and then having a good attitude, just feeling like I don't want to have a negative space. It's hard enough to do this job. It's even worse when you have to go to a room and you just know there's going to be someone who's going to be bringing like that darkness to the room that you're going to be like, oh, we got to deal with it. Like, I try and keep away from that sort of stuff. And then beyond that, it's preparation, making sure everyone understands what we're doing, like having a goal for the day, having a goal for the week. Everyone knows that we're moving in the same direction towards the same goal. I'm trying to like, I feel like in the boot camp that I do, this is like a full day. This is like
for sure.
But I think this is like, that's kind of like the basics of like how we're building the room, strong writers, good attitude, making sure we have a plan so that everyone's moving towards the same direction. And then, just being supportive for each other.
It sounds like both your rooms are talking about how do you set up that, like I said, what are you setting up the sandbox? So not just like, here's the show, here's our goals, like being upfront of like being transparent, here's what we need to get done. So by setting that at the beginning, and then if people know what to do, and if they're not meeting those goals, it's like, yep, you're not meeting your goals. Like, this is what was asked. Like, this feels, I know it sounds almost like super MBA management sort of thing, but that's what you're doing, right? You're managing a group of people. And it feels like you're, as opposed to you just being sort of authoritarian, you're showing them, be like, this is stuff. And it helps them empower them to kind of move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is our goal. It's not my goal. It's our goal. We're here. We're in this together now. We're in this room together, and we're, and it's like 2 weeks from now, we have to have this. So like, let's start. I don't have any, everything that Anthony said is what I would do also. Someone told me, like, when I was like in TV writing school, one of our instructors, and his advice was be a joy to be around. And I always think about that because I think it is really important. When I was starting out, that's what I tried to be. And like, look, I was pretty happy. I had my dream job. I did go to the writer's room every day being in a really good mood. Like, hello, we get to do this for a living. Like, you know, it is actually amazing and, you know, a privilege. And so I try to kind of have that energy when I go into the room, and I hope other people have the same. And yeah, that's what I have.
In your rooms, I mean, because, you know, we're talking about Canadian writer rooms, which can also be quite small sometimes. So do you have the ability to have like more senior, you know, sure, you have your number twos, like more senior writers, more junior writers? And if so, how do you manage that, knowing that different writers are going to need different types of attention?
Marsha, you go.
I would say I'm probably a little bit more gentle with the newer writers. I just was recently in a room, and I feel like the senior writer there would probably attest. Well, we were friends, so I was definitely less gentle with him. But, you know, and like, look, I probably did waste a little bit of time trying to help people, but I really did want them to know and understand and learn from the experience to come out, not just being like, no, that's not a good idea, no, that doesn't work, but to really kind of take people through the paces of like, this is what it takes to like get something to, you know, to really have a scene, to understand how to advance the story or whatever. All things that people know. Some, they do know it, like they don't get there without knowing it, but it's just different when you're in the room to just kind of keep everybody in that mindset. So whereas if you're a senior writer, it's like, yeah, like I know you've been through it all. So you maybe need a little bit less like hand holding and a little bit less, like you get it, like not every pitch is going to land and we move on, you know, and I expect that of senior writers. And whereas a newer writer, I want to help them a little bit more, like to get there and not, you know, take it home as much as we all do. Like, it was terrible today. You know, none of my ideas. It's like, we're not counting ideas. We're not like, I don't have an inner tally of which ideas made it. It's like, you showed up ready to work and you had a good attitude. That's what I will at the end of the day.
Yeah, for me, I would say like I kind of like having both the co-EP, and I like having young writers as well. The thing that I've been doing recently is I've been making sure that I have a co-EP on the run of the series with me, because like Marsha said earlier, a lot of times in Canadian situations, like the showrunner's there by themselves for a while. So I try and get my co-EPs on episodic deals now, so that they're not on a weekly deal, so that they can just like, they'll just disappear and all of a sudden it's like, oh, all of my stuff. It's just good to have that person to be able to bounce ideas off of and just kind of like, what do you think about this? This makes sense. And also like if you have, when you're in the run of a production, being able to have one of you on the floor and then one of you in a meeting, it just helps so that you don't have to try and be in two places at once. So that's why I love having upper level writers around, because then I can, you know, and also because then they'll be ready to show on their own show soon, and then someone else will step into their role and then they'll become a co-EP. And I think what's good about having the writers who are new is just like, you know, it's all about like building that base for the future. And then also potentially people who will become showrunners and hire me on shows when no one wants to hear from me anymore.
Can I just say that before we came here, I was actually planning to ask Anthony, like I was like looking forward to this so that I could ask Anthony how on earth, like I have been a co-showrunner twice. And it's like still like literally took over my life. So I was like, how is Anthony running a show on his own? So I feel slightly better about myself knowing that you
like two shows. He's running like multiple shows at the same time.
And I'm like, children, you have a family. I have none of those things. And yet still like, I literally just took over my entire life, but saying that you have a co-EP and someone who stays, it's true. In the US, I think this is very common to have your co-EP, a true co-EP, run the room for you when you're not there. Go be involved in production, be in post with you. And it's not something that happens here. It's like, it's the showrunner and the showrunner alone, which is why it was so good for me to co-show run both of those times. Otherwise I would have been on my own. And it's like, that's untenable. It's just, it's not, not an option. And it also is good, to Anthony's point, in terms of staffing. So if you're the showrunner, and you say you have your co-EP or like your true number 2 or your co-show running, it's like if the other person is in the room, you still want another senior writer to help that person in the room. Otherwise, then that person is the only experienced one and everybody else is junior. And now they're doing all the heavy lifting for you. So you really still need people of these varying levels. And I will also say, just what I like about having newer writers in is this, that when you have been a writer for a while and you've made a lot of television, you can just get into these patterns. Like, this is the way it's going to go. You just do this, this, this. So it's nice to have this different energy, or someone who comes in and looks at it different, who isn't so entrenched in the rules, that can maybe break us out of that thinking sometimes, which I think is also important. So just to say, if you're like a new person, it's like you're still bringing something to that room, even if it's not all that experience, just that different way of looking at it that I think experienced writers really need, so that we don't just regurgitate the same kinds of stories all the time.
Yeah. Cool. All right. The second last question I have here is, so we've talked about, you moving into the room, you working with various, crew, as well as your writing room. But let's talk about, your interaction as showrunners with producers, with network, with broadcasters. How do you maintain or fight for your creative vision when you have networks or broadcasters? How do you either fight for it, or how do you get them on board? You kind of inception them that this is their idea to begin with. That was really your idea. Like, how do you find that sort of challenge? Because as a writer in the room, maybe I'm convincing the showrunner, but that might be a whole different language of me trying to convince or work with a network or broadcast, etc.
Anthony, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean,
I want to know.
You want to? All right. So for me, this is. I feel like this is one of my specialties, and I will first of all admit two different things of privilege that I have that makes it easier for me than a lot of other people. One, I'm a man, so that's a privilege that I know, I acknowledge absolutely. One, I'm a Black man, but I'm a light-skinned Black man, so that's another privilege that I have that I acknowledge. So, but given that, one of the things that I try and do is I start with clarity. So before we even get, early on, before we even get to stuff, I explain to them what my vision is. Here's what I'm trying to do. Here's what I want it to be. Do you have any objections to the things that I'm saying to you right now? And then if they say, no, this sounds great, I use that shit on them later on. Because at some point they're going to be like, well, I thought we were going to go. I was like, oh no, remember we talked about this? And then they go, oh, yeah, we talked about this. So that's the first thing. Then also when these things pop up, one of the things I will often do when I get notes, and it happens often, that make that request for a character to be inauthentic or to change in some way that I disagree with, I'll remind them that the audience for the show, who this character or whatever represents, will not buy into a character that feels inauthentic. And then I use the community as as a way to kind of convince them, like, we owe them, we have an obligation to this community to make sure that the character's authentic. And a lot of times that's usually what they kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, we don't want to be seen as the entity that's kind of stepping on someone's authenticity. So those are the two things that I do. Start with clarity, so you're upfront about it, and then just if you need to use your community as as a way to get what you want, then do that.
That's amazing. Starting with clarity is so important. Like, the biggest problem you'll have is when nobody is making the same show. You're making one show, the producers are making another show, and the network's making another show. That is the recipe for disaster. So it's like, we all need to be on the same page. This is the show we're making. This is the tone. This is what we're going for. It's like, and it's true, like, along the way, people will falter, but you got to bring them back to that thing we all agreed on, that this is what it is. And I think what Anthony is saying and acknowledging the privilege is kind of important, because it is something that I think is challenging, because I think what's really important is for people to trust you. It's like they need to trust you. They need to trust that your vision is right, that you know what you're doing, that you're going to deliver this show and whatever. And so you have to build that trust. And sometimes it's hard because you're starting from a place where, like, despite Anthony's privilege, one might argue you aren't starting from a place of trust. You're not the typical picture of a showrunner. So it's really important that you build that trust. And ways you do that are like having these conversations, having clarity, being available, being accountable. Like, don't be flaky. Like, someone sends you an email, answer that email. Get on the phone. You know what I mean? All of those things, so that really feels like we're handing over this $1 million, multi-million dollar thing to you, and you've got this. And like the audience thing is like it's a good tool, because it's like, it's showing like, oh, I understand that this is a product for you. It is, and it is. This is a business. It is a product that they want to sell. So that is like their return on investment that you're speaking to. This is what you have to understand. It's art, and it is art to us, but you also have to be like aware of what the other part of it is for them.
Well, on like the type of stuff you're both talking about, is like it all comes back. It sounds like it's not just, it's communication. You're talking about the networkers, the network and broadcasters with your team. It's like not just communicating your vision and not being like, here's my one-pager pitch. Here's what it is in clarity. Can you please repeat it back to me? And then so all like that's what it means, or almost being like, or what do you need to make sure you're on the same page, as opposed to be like, I'm just doing my pitch. Here it is. Here's my log line. Like it just sounds like you keep circling. Both of you are circling back that throughout the process with departments, with writers, with the broadcasters. That not just how do you keep your show and your vision, but how do you build trust with other people, is making sure that not just are you communicating, but you're actually really checking in with, are they understanding what you're saying? And if not, how do we clarify that? Like, it seems to be a clear thing.
Yeah, and I want to say that like the best scenario is when you and your producers are on the same page and you're working together and you have a good relationship with your producers. It's going to make your life so much easier to have that relationship with them rather than it's them against us, to really feel like you're doing it together, because you are. And so like, even in the situation where I was telling you, where I asked this producer to leave the writer's room, but you might say, you know what, why don't we have a check-in at the end of each day? I'll let you know how it went, or whatever. Like, respect the reason that they're worried, that they need some kind of they need to like understand what's going on. That's where it's being driven from. Offer them something. You don't want to just be like, get out of this room and like sever the relationship. You want to have a good relationship. You want to honor what it is they're afraid of, and try and like quell those fears. And maybe that's more communication. Maybe there's other ways to do it that you can say, like, you being in the writer's room isn't right for me, but like, let's find another way together to like get you what you need. Like, to really try and approach it in that spirit of collaboration, I think will really serve you in the end. Because it sometimes you do need your producers to go to bat for you. And so you would rather have like you guys like on the same page, fighting the battles together if there are battles to come.
I use this term workplace empathy to talk about, let's say when you talk about producers, be like, what do they care about? What are their needs? What are they coming from? And they figure out how to meet them on there. And you have a perfect example of how you got the producer out of the room, but you also figure out like, what's the note behind the note of why they're afraid, and then addressing that to make sure that they're actually on board and even supportive of like, yes, Marsha, go off with your room. You're going to bring me magic because I trust you now. And I trust that you're going to manage the room properly.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. One last question, you two have both talked about it, is, the fact is that you are two Black Canadian showrunners. Also, Marsha, yourself, you are a female identifying showrunner. So, I wonder if, there's particular things you want to talk about in terms of, being a showrunner, a person from an underrepresented population, being a leader, what things that are, negative, what things are positive, how does that affect you in regards to how you have to adjust your management position or not? And what are those, I guess, additional steps or so that you have to navigate? Or what would you give? Well, honestly, what would you give advice to other folks who are for underrepresented populations who want to be in the positions that you are?
Anthony, you go first.
I will say, get ready to be questioned, get ready to be tested, get ready to be you're going to be like, I'll tell you a quick little story. I was on a set for something. I was getting questioned by execs from this broadcaster. And at one point, I just had to tell the producer to remind them that I have made over 200 episodes of television. And then once they said that, they were like, okay, yeah, okay. So it's going to, regardless of how experienced you are, these questions are going to pop just because of the system that we're in, right? It's most of the showrunners are white men, and when they see someone who's not a white man, they're going to be like, oh, I wonder if they're going to be okay. And yeah, we'll be fine. So expect those things. I'm still learning how to, like, I feel like for me, like, I use comedy as a way to kind of like get past all that stuff, and that's just my coping mechanism. And I feel like you have to figure out a way for you to deal with those things yourself. Have people, like, I always hire writers who are I can talk to and just kind of like look at each other like, it's fucked up, right? Like, yeah, this is messed up, and then we kind of talk about it with each other, and then we can like move on. Finding people that you can trust and work with and those kinds of things, I think that'll go a long way. And I think just continue to realize that, you're not alone. There are people who are in the same boat as you. So just, if you need to talk to someone, reach out to other showrunners and to talk to other people and just like, I'm dealing with this thing. I've dealt with the same thing. Here's how I handled it. Yeah. I just feel like the community is there. So I would just say, like, just reach out and someone will reach back.
Okay. Marsha?
That's another, like, that example is another great example of like what is the benefit to having, like, to having a good relationship with your producer, because I have definitely had my producer like step in and be like, oh, actually, she's the showrunner, and we're not going to do that thing without her in it, or you're going to listen to what she says because she's the showrunner and whatever. And it totally sucks to have someone intervene and say that when, and especially like, as you say, and it's like, I didn't just, I've worked for like, I feel like I've worked for a long time and like worked my way up. And I really felt like, oh, I'm going to get there. And then it's just going to be like, I'm going to get the respect I've earned. It's like, well, that's not how the world works. But I would say that, like, I feel like most people in our positions have dealt with it before, and probably how you deal with it in this situation is not wildly different than how you would deal with it in any of the other situations. You are still a professional in a professional setting, and you have to remember that, but you also have to advocate for yourself, as you sometimes do in life. Find people to talk to and complain to, or, commiserate with, or whatever, like all of the things that we do. It was like, obviously it would be disingenuous to say it's not something you're going to deal with, but I feel like, I don't know, I guess I feel like, yeah, you get a lot of practice in your life dealing with it. And so, it doesn't have to stop you, and you just have to find a way to navigate it. And it's always a little bit different, and call on other people for advice, or just for someone to be like, whatever, you put on a smile, and then you go home and you're like, can you believe this thing that happened? That's how it goes sometimes.
Okay. All right. Okay. So we got some time here now. We're getting a bunch of questions coming in here. I'm seeing all the fantastic questions here. So the first question I've seen here from Jonah, this is thrown off me here. I don't know if I can see Jonah. I see it in the chat here. Okay, question is, how did you both break in? Oh, there we go, Jonah. I don't see the last name here. So just Jonah, no last name. Says, how did you both break into TV writing? So that's like question we talked way back when. So let's start off with Marsha. How did you first get in your first break?
I guess my first real break, I would say, is Private Eyes, because it was the first show I worked on where I got a script. I got half a script, actually, or two halves of a script. And the way I broke in, I mean, I had done so much I had, gone to Humber's TV writing and producing. I had worked in production for a couple of years. Then I went to the CFC, and then I went to the CFC, and it was about a year after that, after I graduated. But so in that time of doing all of those things, I met a lot of people, and I just kept networking and kept trying to like work those connections so that by the time Private Eyes came around, I was hired to be the script coordinator, which is an entry-level position. And everybody who was working on the show had met me several times, and they were like, why don't we give this person a chance? Basically. I mean, that's how it went. And it was because of the work I had put in before to like just make contact with people, like, you know, whatever it may be, you know, going to like Banff or whatever, volunteering at events, going to, what do you call them? Like, what are they? Oh, conferences and things like that. I did everything I could to kind of be a part of the community, to meet people. I don't know if I feel like maybe only one of these people had even read a script of mine, just to say. So this isn't like I got like hundreds of people to read my scripts. It was like mostly just meeting people, pitching, or just casually meeting them. And then I got offered the job. So that, and then from there, it just kind of, I just got more and more, you know, one person gets a show, and then you go on that show, and then on another show, etc.
Did you have an agent at the time when you got your first gig? You did. Okay.
I did. My agent. No.
Was your agent instrumental in getting you your first gig, or was it more like they just helped to finesse that contract?
To finesse the contract. And my agent told me when I signed with him, you will get your first job. I probably will not get you your first job. And he was right. I'm so grateful to have him, and he's done so, like, yeah, if I had to negotiate my own contracts, I would be like living in a shoe right now, probably. So I'm very grateful to him. But no, he said that to me, and you know, whatever you think about that answer, it made me feel like, okay, I got to get out there and hustle. I can't be like, I have an agent and now I'm just going to sit down and wait for the jobs to roll in. He did send me on a lot of meetings. I did go to quite a lot. So some of that networking was as a result of my agency, though.
Yeah, honestly, Marsha, I don't think, from talking to other people, I don't think you're an aberration. I think most the first gig you're getting yourself. Yeah, especially when it comes to those things. Yeah. How about yourself, Anthony? What would you say is how did you get your first? How did you break into the writer's room?
I was a theater kid. I did a lot of theater, a lot of acting in theater, writing, directing. And then when I was living in LA, one of my friends saw a play that I wrote, and he's like, you should write for TV. And I was like, well, how does that happen? And he introduced me to his lit manager, who 17 years later is still my literary manager today. And she was a writer. She used to be a writer, and she had a writing workshop, and she would kind of find writers to represent through the writing workshop. So I did the writing workshop, wrote scripts during that workshop, got signed on, started doing meetings through my manager, got into a couple of diversity programs. This is also, don't forget, this is in LA, right? So I did the Fox Diversity Program. I did an NBC Showcase. That NBC Showcase is what got the attention of some writers at The Office. And then that led to a meeting with Greg. And then that's how I got one of the diversity spots on The Office, which is a whole different, that's another topic.
Other panel.
That's a whole other panel, diversity spots. Because there's good and bad to that.
Yeah. And they have those great programs which you have to have your papers, which I saw as I was going to apply for one of those, being like, I don't.
Yeah. You have to be able to be there.
Yeah. All right. Okay, great. Question here. I got one, looking at one here from, here we go. Anthony, you mentioned coming up in the American system and how it's different from the Canadian one. What differences did you find the most jarring as you jumped back to Canada?
I think money.
Okay.
So, I mean, but for real though, right? I feel like it's like one of those, is one of the things, like they have more resources because they throw more money at the writers' rooms. And that's the first thing, right? I feel like I've had to fight for extra money I haven't had to fight hard. Like most producers want the shows to succeed. And if I say, if we can kind of allocate some of the money towards writers' room in this way, like for instance, one of the things I do is the writers here don't often spend time on set. So I usually try and take at least one of the development weeks from the writers and then put it onto production week. So the writers can come to set and get paid to come to set for at least 1 week during the run of production, right? Because that's one of those things where I was like, it's one of the problems with that. You can't learn to become a showrunner if you're just if you're only going to be there before everything happens. So that to me was jarring, and I think that's one of the things I'm trying to kind of, at least on my shows, adjust a little bit. Did I say money?
Yeah.
Okay, good. But it's just one of those things where it's just like, it's just a different system. I think the what the writers do, how much time they spend with the show, I think that's part of the thing that makes it difficult to make shows here, because how are you going to tell the people that are responsible for the creation of the words on the page and the creation of the story that you're telling, that they shouldn't be a part of the process when you start shooting and you start cutting? It doesn't make any sense, right? So that's the most jarring part to me.
Anthony moved back to Canada, and now he has to live in a plain white room. He can't afford.
It's just me and
receipts. That's all he has on his wall. Bills he owes. That's what it is now.
What it is in America, I'd have 6 walls in America.
Okay, sorry.
No. Can I ask you a question then? Because you talk about money here, going off in Anthony's, talk about like money to like bring like writers into the into producing and stuff. Do you find that money has more impacts also in regards to like how often the producers are with you, or their feedback or so? Like, does that affect it all, or is it really just when you say money, is it really just we just don't have the money to do that, as opposed to it actually almost changes the dynamic of the culture of notes, the culture of feedback, the culture of taking creative risk or not?
I feel like the producers here feel more connected to the material, because it's kind of like they own the IP now, and they're more connected to like the running of the production data. I feel like a lot of the times the studio system in the States is kind of like, I very rarely will see production companies on set, or like they're just busy doing other things, right? So it's mostly like the showrunner dealing directly with the network, and those notes are kind of like going back and forth in that way. So I don't know if it's maybe it's because like the producers are like this, like I'm either going to win or lose based on how the show does, and it's going to they're just a little bit more at risk, I guess, of losing things here than in the States. Because in the States, it's like you get a deal, you're going to get paid as a producer regardless of how well the show does, and there's just less pressure on them that way. Here it's kind of like, if this doesn't work, I'm out. So that's why they hover nervously at all times.
Because it's their butt on the line here. Okay, cool. Zoe Whittall has a question here. When you are hiring, how do you decide if a writer is ready to move up from a story editor, staff writer to the producer level? Is it something you look for in their samples or in the interview?
Or interview, like this is like.
I think the question. Yeah, Zoe. Yeah, you can clarify for me, Zoe. But I guess the question is, you've probably maybe worked with that person, or maybe you've seen that they had story editor credits, and you're like, I think maybe they're a co-producer, or is it more like the agent is working with it, be like, no, you're not hiring them unless you give them a credit.
This took me a little while to figure out, especially moving back here, because in the States it's kind of like you just move up. You're all doing the same job, but you're just moving up the ranks based on how much experience you have. So for me, I'm just kind of looking at experience. If you have a bunch of experience, I don't want you to. I want to get you to a producer level as quickly as possible. And one thing I'll say to you, like when you get to a producer level, don't go back down, because happens a lot to a lot of people. When people offer you contracts after you got into a producer, tell them you want to be a consulting producer or a development consultant. Like don't go back to story editor on a show if you've already gotten to a producer level, because then that'll affect your next quote, right? So that's kind of like one of the bits of advice I would give. But I feel like for me, it's experience. If you have some experience in the room, some experience in set, I feel comfortable giving you a producer credit.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be very hard for me. Like if this was a person I worked with, I would know from working with them. I would know from how they were in the room. Like if they and usually, as Anthony's saying, that's experience. So it's not, I wouldn't, the sample would be hard. Again, what would be easier for me to like decide for someone to go from a writer to being a producer if I knew them, was that like I'd worked with them before, and when they handed in their script, it was solid. Like it was, so then I know their script isn't going to need a lot of work when it comes back to me already. That's like something that's going to make it easier. You know, they're good in the room, good at ideas, good at like generating ideas and like advancing the story, doing all of the things you have to do. Like those are the things that I think you learn as you go up. And so it does kind of fall under experience, and the only way to know that is if I myself have experienced seeing you in a room, or looking at your credits and being like, oh, they've done this many. I might ask somebody if someone else worked with them, what do you think this but it is like, it's like often it's like your agent, it's like saying, I want to hire like you should want a different credit, a higher credit. And so then you have to be trying to make that determination. And if you can't make it yourself, I would probably ask someone that they worked with what they thought. They thought they were ready to make it. But as I will just say, this is the other problem to what Anthony is speaking, that again, because writers have very short contracts, they're not getting the experience they need to advance. And so now, and they're getting stunted in a way of only having a short amount of time, as opposed to getting to spend weeks and weeks and weeks breaking stories, seeing the whole thing through. It's why it's just so crucially important that we have longer contracts.
Yeah. Okay. Question here from Tony Tran. When you are offered a showrunning position, what is the first few things that you have to do besides saying yes to the contract? So you get it, you're like, cool, you're the showrunner now, a contract signed. What are the first things that you're doing? Let's imagine it's because you're talking about development or that sort of thing. Say it's like the show, you get the show, say with showrunner for let's say Porter. So it's a show that's already happening, et cetera, et cetera. You're hired on as a showrunner. What are some of the first things you'd be doing?
Hiring the room was probably the first thing. We hire before the room started. So let's say in that period before you're like in the room being a showrunner, what did we do? We got the call. So we were reading scripts. We were meeting with writers to do the hiring. And then in our case, because of the way, and then we're making a schedule. We started to make the schedule like, okay, this is what knowing like where we wanted to be. So if we're going to have a room, how long is the room going to be? Okay, it's going to be this amount of time. How do we break that down? We're going to break an episode. So say it's going to take a week and a half per break. So you start to kind of work back from that. So then when we did the Porter, we knew we were only going to have, let's say 2 weeks, maybe it was 3, I don't remember. Let's say 3 weeks to do a season break, like just kind of the big picture of what was going to happen in the season. And so because we didn't have a lot of time, that wasn't a lot of time, Anne-Marie and I did a week together with one other writer where we kind of came up with some tent poles for the whole season. And then we took that to the writer's room and said, this is like just the tent poles of what we have and help us fill in the pieces to get there. So we had kind of a season pitch by the end of that 2 or 3 weeks or whatever. So those are the things that I remember doing before we started the room.
Yeah, I think it's hiring the room. Yeah, absolutely. And then I think what Marsha just said is great too, because one of the things I was trying to do is before the room comes together is have like, say, here's the plan for when we get together. Here's already what I figured out so that they're not coming in cold. And one of the things that people always have, a lot of times people are kind of like, oh, it takes forever to figure out that first little bit. And I'm like, if you kind of have the tent poles, then when the writers come, they're pitching towards something rather than just kind of blue skying everything. You already have a sense of like, here's kind of where, if we land somewhere different, fine, but here's where I want to kind of like start thinking about moving when we're thinking about the show. And then that specificity and that specific goal just makes it easier for you to kind of get things done quickly. I think the other thing you're going to start thinking about is the scripts. You're going to start talking to a line producer about what the budget's going to be, about how you're going to spend the money. Is there going to be a show that's going to be mostly on location? Are you going to have to be in a studio for a bunch of it? Figuring those things out, talking about runtime. I think that's a thing that gets overlooked a lot. Like you want to know what your runtime is. And also then from your broadcaster, like just the specificity of like, are there going to be act breaks? Are there not going to be act breaks? If there are act breaks, like, do you need a certain amount of time for the first act? Do you need a certain amount of time for because when you're breaking stories, then you can be like, you'll know what parameters you're working within, right? So there's a lot of little things that'll pop up, but those are kind of like some of the first things. Yeah,
it's true. I feel like I've started many a show and being like, wait, how many acts are we doing? And then I'm like, at work and being like, what are we doing here? It's true. Also, if we ever, you would maybe be choosing your writing room space. You'd be like picking an area to have the writer's room. And like also like, so say you send the writers whatever material you have, maybe you send them the pilot and the Bible, but if you have some references, you might say to them, these are the kinds of shows I've been watching or kind of like thinking of, or books or articles or whatever, just so that the writers can come in with a little bit of the like knowledge you already have in terms of like the research you've done. So that's like a nice thing to do for the writers so that they feel like they can prepare to be in the room as well. Just give them, if they no pressure, but just for them to like have some touchstones. So there's maybe some other things that you might do leading in the early days. And then it just starts to pile on from there. Enjoy that phone call because it's all downhill from there.
There we go. Just enjoy that. Get yourself, get a whole bunch of drinks, etc. We're coming up to the time. You know what? I mean, honestly, Anthony, you talked about how you teach a BIPOC showrunner boot camp, which is like 6 weeks of like day, half day courses. So trying to cover this entire topic in an hour is just, it's not enough time at all. I have here one question here. And then I'm going to ask you my own questions here. So the last official question from the Q&A here is, what is the best piece of advice you've both received throughout your career? I'm going to throw it to, Marsha. No, Marsha's saying no. So I'm going to throw it to Anthony.
Oh my God. I'm like terrible at this. I feel like, well, actually, this is better than what advice would you give? The best piece of advice I've ever been given is the question?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Anthony, you go. You know.
What? I thought you were going to, You want to?
I told myself mine.
All right. The best piece of advice I've been given. Oh boy. Jesus. Gee.
Can I ask an intermediate question as you're thinking about this? So I give you some time. So here's another question then, is that showrunning is, so that's the last one. The second last, showrunning is a crazy, crazy job. It is long, it is stressful, it is nuts. And people, unfortunately, I've seen people who fall apart from it. How do you protect your mental health? I mean, this cannot be as a showrunner, heck, even as a producer or writer, how do you protect your mental health and get through, this particular job? What are things that, do you have any advice about that in general?
Yes, I think it's important to have people to talk to. When things get messed up, just acknowledge them and find a loved one, find a friend, find someone to be like, you won't believe, like you need to speak those things out. Otherwise they just build up. And I think also not being afraid to fight for the things you want to fight for. I think understanding like you have power as the showrunner. You are in a place where people will look to you to protect them, right? To protect the show and to protect the stories and the characters. So don't be afraid to take that role on and speak up and say those things. And in terms of like mental health, I think me feeling like I've done that for the characters makes me feel better at the end of the day. Like I'm doing the job, I'm working and making sure that I'm not like hiding from that responsibility. I think that's a big part of it. And I think, have fun. I feel like a lot of times like people forget that making TV should be fun. And I think one of the things that I try and do is have a pretty loose atmosphere where people can enjoy themselves and not be afraid to make mistakes. If you make a mistake, we'll figure it out. And I think one of the things that cripples people is fear, right? And so if I try and remove as much fear as possible from the set, then it makes it an easier kind of time.
Okay.
I think that's
all right, cool. I'm going to go off to Marsha about mental health. And Anthony, while we're doing that, you got to be thinking about what, I remember that question. That question was, so the best piece of advice you received throughout your career. Now let's go to Marsha and talk about how do you take care of yourself? Or do you just not? You're like, that's for 20 years from now for my therapist.
I feel like I'm much better. Get a therapist is number one. Well, I will say, I'm just going to say about the other one. I said that my instructor at Humber TV Writing and Producing said, be a joy to be around. And I actually think that that's really good advice. It's kind of speaking to what Anthony said about having fun. Like, it's just, it is so hard. And so it's like, to like make it fun, to like want to go to work. There's nothing worse than like waking up in the morning and dreading going to work. Like, nobody dreams of being a writer or a showrunner and wants that life, wants that existence. You want it to be like, I want to go to work, and you need to encompass that in yourself. As again, as Anthony said, it's the top down, you know, like that attitude is like what is going to like permeate the environment. So is it the best piece of advice? I don't know, but it's one that I certainly remember and live by. As for self-care, I do feel like the first time I was a showrunner, I like literally ran myself ragged. And so I really had to take some like serious mental health, like, you know, like really had, so I started meditating. I don't meditate every day. Sometimes what I do, sometimes I do meditate, but sometimes I'll also just do a meditative activity. So like, if you're like, oh, I can't just sit there and whatever. So you do something like, it's like when people like knitting or playing an instrument or watering or gardening or things like that, things that just help you like calm down, zone out, and just be in your own space, taking care of your own thing. I haven't done it. I actually didn't do it through the Porter because it was too crazy, but I did during Mary Kills People. I used to dance. I used to go to like dance classes once a week. So again, just like something, exercise, energy, totally out of your head. I spend time with people who are not in the business. So then that way I don't spend even my free time. I have many, many friends in the business, but I have a few who aren't. And I think it's really helpful because it's like, they only want to hear so much. You get to unload and then you move on, you know, because you don't want to bore them with your TV tales. And are there any other things I do to take care? No, I think that's about it. But I think it's also, I do try, Anne-Marie and I tried, we didn't totally accomplish it, but when we first started, we tried that each one of us would take one day off a weekend. So like she could have Saturday off and I could have Sunday off, for example. So then on that day, the other person would answer any emails that came in or do whatever work and then pass the baton to the other person. So like, if you can do that and get a day off, like I advise it. We managed to do it a couple of times and it was glorious.
Okay. All right, cool. And then going back to Anthony, because you got both those questions because you're so efficient. You got both the self-care and the best piece of advice. So then circling back to AQF here, the best piece of advice that you've received throughout your career.
You know, I'll say this. One of the things that when I was living in Atlanta and I was working for Kaiser Permanente as an actor, we would drive around to like different schools and we would do a play for teachers, and it was called Acting on Stress, and it was just telling teachers like, there's a lot of stress, especially in the Georgia school system. Like, here's some tips. And one of the things that I still take with me to this day is like, you can't control other people's actions, but you can control your reaction, right? So like, that kind of like was one of those things where like, those moments where I was kind of like, oh yeah, you know what? I can't control people's actions. So I find that I let things go a lot where I'm like, if I can't control it, I don't worry about it. What I worry about is how I react to those things. And I am in control of those reactions. So I feel a lot of power that way. And also you let go responsibility in a way too, where you kind of like, well, I can't control what other people do. Like I'm not a puppeteer. Like I can't do, so all I can do is try and get, just try and move forward as best as I can and just control my reactions. And that's kind of like a little bit of a piece of Zen that I've attained.
I just want to say that is also, it's like I never got that advice, but it's a lesson I will say that I have learned, because sometimes it's like, yeah, you don't want to say anything because you're afraid of the other person's reaction, but you can't control the reaction. All you can do is like control how you're going to approach something. So if you approach something calmly, respectfully, with integrity and with honesty, and then that person flies off the handle, that's them. You didn't do, like, you can only, like, you approach it as a professional and in that way. And then whatever the reaction is the reaction. But you did what was true to you and your heart and in a respectful way. And then I find it easier to let go of that other thing. But if you're having an emotional reaction and then someone is having an emotional reaction back, well, that's, it's going to get messy. So to like really just think about that, like what is in your control and your power.
Yeah.
It's just
Talk about doing almost like your due diligence. Like you've only gone, you did everything else after that, I met you here. So that's all I can do.
Yeah. And it's like that thing, like there's like for actors who are auditioning or for writers who meet on shows, right? Like you can't control who, like the way like, to get a job or to like get an audition, like you have no control over that stuff. So for me to worry about it is one of those things where it's a wasted activity. Just like, I don't know, go hang out with my kids or do something silly or fun instead of using that brain space on that stuff. That's some good advice. If you can get to that level, it'll help you. Great.
All right. Thank you for staying for these extra 10 minutes. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for just being you, for making some fantastic shows. And also I know, both of you have not just done a great job of creating great work, but also uplifting a lot of other people, which is really important, especially as showrunners, that you've been able to bring other voices in. And I think that's really, really important. Whereas some other people, they're like, maybe they're just in it for themselves. You two are not in it for yourselves. And I think that the community is much stronger and better for it. So thank you so much again for giving all your time. Thank you so much for everyone who came out for this talk and these fantastic questions here. That's kind of all I got. I got check out WGC for updates. Make sure to vote and read your emails. Is that the official thing? I don't know. Marsha, am I doing everything properly?
Please read the WGC letter. We would really appreciate it. We're trying to get the information out there, retweet things that we tweet for people to know. Thank you everybody for coming. Sorry if we didn't get to all your questions, and hopefully we'll get to see you at a WGC event sometime in the future. That's the dream for me.
Cool. Anything else, Anthony? Any sign off?
Yeah, if you have any questions.
Great job, Anthony, great job, by the way.
If you have any questions, just email Marsha directly.
Yeah. And I will have my assistant forward them to Anthony. So, guys, we've got a system here. Anyway, thank you. This was a pleasure. Lovely way to spend a Tuesday night.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. You have a great night. Emily, I'll talk to you a little bit later here. Stop the record. See you all later. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.